We're looking at animated horror movies on the Horror Movie Syllabus. And we would have got away with it too if it wasn't for your meddling copyright strikes. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a good idea of how the Horror Movie Syllabus works. But in short, what we do is look at a particular subgenre of horror and then pick 3 movies from that subgenre to examine. Today, the subgenre that we're looking at is animated horror. Basically, horror movies that are animated. It's pretty much right there in the title. Now, as simple as the title may be, the subgenre itself is a little bit more complicated, or perhaps complicated isn't really quite the right word for it. The subgenre is, there's not a lot of horror in animated horror. A lot of it tends to be aimed towards children, at least in the US. When we get outside of the US with animation, particularly, say, Japan with anime, you get a lot more options in regards to actual bona fide scary horror movies. But to be frank and honest with you, I'm not the biggest anime person. I have watched some of it. I got into it a little bit in college because some friends in college were into it. I have a brother-in-law who likes it, but I don't know a lot about it. So I kind of stepped away from anime for the most part when coming up with this video. That said, A, it doesn't mean there won't be anime in this video, and B, it's possible we're going to revisit anime in the future. If we do get around to that horror movie supplement, which is on the agenda at this point, there's a real good chance we're going to take a closer deep dive into anime. So that caveat out of the way, what we're really talking about today is mostly movies that are aimed at kids or are kid friendly, and maybe have something else for adults as well, kind of aiming for a broad audience with 1 or 2 exceptions. And I think that's fine. Just because a movie is aimed towards children doesn't mean that an adult can't get something out of it. We've seen that quite a bit. We've seen that in when I did my recommendations for Halloween horror movies. We saw a lot of those movies that are kid friendly. When we did the family friendly horror, a lot of those movies are loved by adults. The best of those movies have something that the adults can get into as well as the kids. And I'd say that same edict is true here with animated horror. But sometimes the movies are still pretty scary for a smaller or younger audience. I think that like all horror, it kind of depends on the individual, how scary it is. I think even adults might find some of this stuff a little bit scary. But overall, I think that what we're really focusing on is not how scary these movies are, but really the artistic merit of the movies. And I mean more in terms of the actual art itself, the actual animation. I used to be really into animation when I was younger, and I still enjoy it now. I remember when I was a kid going to the movies with my grandparents. They took me to see Snow White. It's one of my earlier memories, and I absolutely loved it. But part of what I loved about it was seeing the animation, and it wasn't like my first foray into animation. I watched cartoons like every other kid, and I like cartoons quite a bit. But it was seeing it like in such an artful way. I really got into it for a while. I think there was a brief period of time where I wanted to be an animator, but things didn't shake out that way. But I definitely have an appreciation for animation that, while it has maybe waned as I've gotten older, it hasn't gone away. I think it's waned a little bit just because all of the mainstream animation, or much of it, really is kind of rote to me now that, the computer generated animation, it isn't quite as charming to me as hand-drawn animation. And I don't know. I feel like a lot of the stuff that comes out now is, it's fun now, but it's not exactly timeless, and in 5 years it will feel dated. And so I've been less enamored of it. And again, that's because we're talking about American mainstream animation. If I were to dig in a little deeper, I'm sure I could find a lot of foreign animation that is much more rich and much more interesting. And there's actually even animated shorts and things like that here in America that are more interesting art, more interesting animation styles, but you have to go and seek them out a little bit. And I'm just been frankly too lazy to do that. And that's on me. But I do appreciate the artistry of it. I do appreciate telling a story with animation and the freedom that the animation allows you, or your imagination. You can basically create pretty much anything you can dream up without having to, build sets or find locations or whatever. It really does free up somebody telling a storyteller to the world's the limit. The imagination's your limit, and so I appreciate that aspect of it. And I also just appreciate from a basic art standpoint, the actual drawing, the actual animation itself. So to me, that's a big part of what animated horror is bringing to the table, is just the artistry of it, the way it looks, the aesthetic. That's a big part of the appeal for me. The story, the horror, that's also key. It's not like it's not important to me. I feel though that a lot of these movies, these animated horror movies, if they weren't animated, probably wouldn't be all that interesting, with one or two exceptions, and we'll get into that. But so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for animated horror movies that are frankly beautiful, and also have great stories, or really interesting to me. And if they're scary too, fantastic. But like I said, most of these movies are probably kid friendly. Some of them aren't though, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to rank these as we always do, as undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels. And in this case, they'll be in the increasing order of how inappropriate they are for children, because I think that'll be fun. So with that, why don't we take a peek at these animation movies and see what we come up with. The first animated horror movie that we're looking at today, our undergraduate selection, is Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. The Nightmare Before Christmas came out in 1993 and is a stop motion animation movie produced by Disney, but it is arguably a bona fide classic, if not a bona fide horror classic, at the minimum, a bona fide animation classic. If you haven't seen it before, The Nightmare Before Christmas is about Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King of Halloween Town, and he becomes enamored with the idea of Christmas and the joy that Christmas brings to the world, and decides he wants to get in on the action and bring Christmas to the world, but through a Halloween lens, because that's all he knows. And as a result, he kind of winds up corrupting Christmas and interfering with Santa Claus, and hijinks abound. And I won't go any further in case you haven't seen it, because if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should see it. Like I mentioned, this movie is arguably a bona fide classic. It is an animation achievement, and it is a wonderful, wonderful film. It's stop motion animation, which, at the time that this movie came out, had kind of gone a little out of fashion, but it made a bit of a comeback. And I'd say in part, in no small part actually, to this movie and its success. The movie's style is absolutely fantastic, and it's got that gothic, dark Halloween look, and then it sprinkles in the Christmas aspect to it, and it winds up blending together rather wonderfully. For those of us who are horror fans, this is the kind of Christmas we would probably like to have, frankly, and I think that works out really, really well. As I mentioned, this movie comes from a Tim Burton story, and the aesthetic of the movie looks very Tim Burton. If you're familiar with his style, like the gothic look and the creepiness and everything like that, it looks very Tim Burton. But he did not direct this movie, and that is a popular misconception that even I have been guilty of making, thinking that Tim Burton was the director of this movie. But no, he produced this movie. He wrote the story for it, but he is not the one who directed it. A man named Henry Selick is the one who directed it. And that distinction is going to be important, but we'll get to that in a little while. But it's still got Burton's fingerprints all over it. So it's understandable why people think that it's a Tim Burton movie, because, first of all, it's on the title of the DVD cover, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. But and it feels like a Tim Burton movie. It very much adheres to Tim Burton's style, and that is, in this case, a very good thing. Tim Burton has his lovers and his haters, but I think pretty much everybody, even people who dislike Tim Burton, could say it works here. His whole vibe, his whole thing, it definitely works here. The movie has very rich characters: Jack Skellington, Sally, all of Oogie Boogie, fantastic villain. Everybody works in this movie, and the voice work is very good in this movie. I would be remiss if I failed to point out Danny Elfman as the singing voice for Jack Skellington. not the regular voice, but the singing voice for Jack Skellington. And for those of you who are, say, millennials or maybe younger, you probably know Danny Elfman as a very famous film composer who did a lot of fantastic movies, a lot of Tim Burton movies for that matter. And for those of you who are maybe Gen X or a little older, you probably remember him as the frontman for Oingo Boingo, which I do. And Danny Elfman's a fantastic singer, and his voice works great here. He also wrote the songs, which is an important piece because the songs are pretty fantastic. For those of you that watch my horror musicals video, you know musicals not really the professor's bag. It's not really for me, but there are rare exceptions. This is going to be one of them. These are songs that I think are bona fide good. They are catchy, they're fun, they've got good lyrics, they're sung and presented in a very fun way. I'll confess I actually own the soundtrack to this movie, and I actually like it. I've actually listened to it multiple times. It's a fun soundtrack. It's fun music, and the bulk of the credit to that goes to Danny Elfman for doing it. And if you've heard Danny Elfman's music, you have an idea of what it sounds like. But it's tremendous fun, and that propels the movie quite a bit. It's a big part of why this movie is so beloved by so many. We talked a little earlier in the video about how a movie can be both for children and for adults. This is a great example of that. This movie is perfectly fine for kids. There is a little bit of scary stuff in there. There's some imagery in there that is pretty intense, but it's stop motion, it's clay, and I think the kids can translate that. Now, I saw this when I was older, so I can't really say that with firsthand knowledge, but my expectation is that while maybe the youngest of kids might really be a little freaked out with this, for the most part, kids are going to roll with this pretty well because even the scary stuff is really cute. And the stop motion, the way it moves and the way it looks, the texture and depth that it has, gives it a charm that I think undercuts the scariness of it. So I think that kids can really roll with it, even though it has a bit of scary imagery in it. But I think that there's a lot for the adults alike, from the music to the story, the concept of a well-meaning pumpkin king trying to bring Christmas joy, and the hilarious results that ensue from that. Puns of things like Santa Claus. There's a lot of fun things for adults to latch on to. I don't think this is a movie that is simply a nostalgia blast. I don't think that the people that love this movie as adults are merely ones that saw this as children, because I think I was 18 when I saw this movie, and I love it, and I still love it to this day. I think it's an absolutely fantastic film. And I think that's important to note. I think it's important to note the widespread appeal. Children can like this, adults can like it. You'll love it if you saw it as a kid. You can love it if you saw it as an adult. I think that is a big key to what makes this work. This is not a movie that set a formula per se for animated horror, although there are copycats, there are other movies that have tried this. I do think that it should be a template for success. I think that this model works really well. It's a very good balance of kid-friendly and adult-pleasing, and with great music and a really great look. It's a great example of everything coming together pretty much perfectly well. I really have zero complaints when it comes to The Nightmare Before Christmas, and I think that I'm probably in the majority with that. This movie has endured for years and years and years. It's something that it was a hit when it came out, but it has only grown in popularity since then. I mean, Disney has doubled down on this and really treated it as one of their classics, even though it really wasn't under the Disney banner. It's not one of the Walt Disney animated movies. And you go to Disneyland, stuff like that. Now especially around Halloween time, you see all of this iconography. You see these characters. You see merchandise regarding this. They've really doubled and tripled down on this movie and really embraced it, and the fans have followed suit, and for good reason. It's an excellent movie. If you haven't seen it, I implore you to check it out because it's a fantastic film. It's great for the whole family, and with Halloween coming up pretty soon, it's a perfect time to do it if you've never seen it. And of course, if you have seen it, let us know what you think too. I'd be surprised if there are people out there that dislike the movie, but if you do, share your thoughts and let's hear them, because I'm open to people having critiques of the movie, or even just certain portions of the movie. If you have some thoughts, and I couldn't think of anything negative to say. So if you have something constructive to say about what the movie falling short in some way for you, yeah, share it with the group, share it with the class, if you will, and of course we'll treat you with respect. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. But for me, The Nightmare Before Christmas is darn near perfection, and it should be celebrated. So I'm celebrating it right now, and I hope you guys check it out. The next movie that we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Coraline. Coraline came out in 2009 and is another stop motion animation movie that has a very similar vibe and style to The Nightmare Before Christmas, and with good reason, but we'll get to that in just a second. If you haven't seen it before, Coraline follows the story of a young girl named Coraline who is kind of ignored by her parents and feels a little neglected and maybe misunderstood because she's a little bit strange and a little bit out there. And she discovers a portal to another world, a mirror universe, if you will, of her own, where everything's a little bit more fantastical and amazing, and people pay more attention to her, and it's more to her liking. But as she spends more and more time there, she finds that everything is perhaps not quite as cool as it seems. And as usual, we'll just put the brakes on there so that we don't spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it. But Coraline is another movie that, if you haven't seen it, you probably should, because it's another really excellent movie. Now, as I mentioned, the aesthetic of Coraline looks very similar, feels very similar to The Nightmare Before Christmas, and there's a reason for that, because it's directed by Henry Selick, the same man who directed The Nightmare Before Christmas. And it shows, but that's not a bad thing at all. There's enough difference in the material and in the look to distinguish between the two, but they are clearly very similar in look, tone, and feel. But again, The Night Before Christmas is fantastic. So Coraline being in that similar vein, also fantastic. The story, though, is very, very different. And I think it's one that people that are a little older probably relate to a lot more. The focus on Coraline, the character, makes this movie a little bit more unique at the time, at least, if not still unique now, in that it shows this struggle of this young girl in terms of fitting in personality wise, but also in terms of just how she relates to herself. I'm having a hard time really articulating exactly what I mean with this, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there is an angle to this movie that is perhaps a little bit ahead of its time. And I think a lot of people connected to it because of that. I think that the character of Coraline is relatable because of the personal issues or anxieties or feelings that she deals with are things that people struggle with now and are more willing to talk about now than they might have been, say, 10 to 15 years ago or longer. I think that people see themselves in Coraline and some of the struggles she has to feel recognized or heard, or to be attended to, or to have her feelings validated. I think that message resonates very well, and even more so now than it did at the time. As a result, Coraline, which was a well-received movie and critically loved when it came out, I think has gotten more of like I don't want to say a cult following, because I think it's much more mainstream than that, but I think it's got a passionate following that cult followings tend to be for the movie. There's a lot of love for this movie. And as people discover it, I think they're surprised at how deep and how intriguing the storyline is. Now, overarchingly, the story is somewhat rote. The overall message of the movie is, kind of be happy with what you have, or don't take for granted the things that you have, which is a common theme in animated movies for kids, horror or otherwise. And it's not a bad message to send at all. I mean, it's the message from Wizard of Oz, for example. It's a great message to send. It's a good one, a very positive one for children in particular. But what Coraline does that I don't think other movies quite do is, while it's saying, be appreciative of what you have, or don't neglect what you have, it's also not vilifying or criticizing Coraline for being who she is. It's not trying to make her conform or just accept her life. It's just asking her to not neglect it, or not to take it for granted. But it still champions her individuality and her personality, and that's key. That's a big part of what makes the movie work. The movie is aided by having a really strong voice cast, anchored by Dakota Fanning as Coraline. And Dakota Fanning is a brilliant, brilliant actress. As a child, she was a brilliant actress. And even though she hasn't been doing as much work that's standing out right now, still a brilliant actress. And she gives Coraline life. She gives the voice work her all to, again, make you feel that she's a fully realized character, which again, voice work combined with the character development just through the story, through the script, through the direction, really makes her feel real. She's also, while she's a child in the movie, she is a strong character. She is not a damsel in distress. She is not a kid that needs to be rescued. She is strong and competent and capable and clever. And all of those things shine through in the movie. She's a fantastic protagonist, a fantastic role model for children, especially girls, but all children, a fantastic role model for adults, frankly. And I think, again, that's why adults in particular can really connect to this movie. Now, the movie was not written by Tim Burton. In fact, as far as I know, Tim Burton has absolutely nothing to do with the movie. It's all Henry Selick, but it's based on a short story or a novella by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, one of the if not one of the greatest comic book writers of all time, wrote The Sandman. And if you haven't read that, you absolutely should, because it's a brilliant horror comic. And I use the word horror comic lightly because it's so much more than that. And I know that Sarah brought this up in the comments recently, very recently, and I told her we'd be talking about Neil Gaiman in the Sandman, and here we are. Now, Sandman has nothing to do with Coraline, really, in terms of anything other than maybe some fantastical imagery, but I have to mention the Sandman. And Neil Gaiman's a prolific writer who's done a lot of amazing things. Done a lot of novel work. If you're familiar with Good Omens, which is another show that's out right now, he did that. American Gods is another one. He is a fantastic writer who deals with the fantastic. Sandman to me being his seminal work. But Coraline, I've never read the novella that it's based on, but the movie is fantastic. It's really tying together this strong character that we talked about earlier, and the emotional issues and the anxieties that she has, and blending them with this Neil Gaiman inspired fantastical world that is, it's Oz, it's Wonderland, it's I've heard all of these analogies made before when people do analysis of this movie, and they all are apt. They all make a lot of sense. They are all appropriate analogies for what Coraline visits when she goes to this other world. And they become more nightmarish as time goes on. And it really is pretty chilling. There's a reason why this is above Nightmare Before Christmas in terms of appropriateness for kids. I don't think it's inappropriate for kids, but there's some scary stuff in there. In particular, the button eyes for the other parents in the other world, pretty disturbing. And unlike A Nightmare Before Christmas, the ending of this movie is a lot darker. There is some really dark things going on here in terms of like what happens to children and stuff like that. That are, and again, I don't want to spoil things, but some dark stuff in here that for younger kids in particular might be a little bit difficult or challenging for them to grapple with. And for the parents of those children might be difficult to explain, frankly. The themes we talked about earlier, the themes of anxiety that Coraline deals with, things like that, most of that stuff's probably just kind of go over the heads of younger children. But some of the plot stuff that happens, some of the the stuff about the stuff happening to children and things like that, challenging for younger kids. And so that's why we're putting it here at the graduate level. But that said, if you think your kids can handle it, show it to them, because it's a fantastic movie. It's got a great message, not only of again appreciating what you have, but also being an individual, not conforming, and being a strong-willed person who's clever and self-reliant. I think these are great lessons for anybody to learn, and so I think it's really an important movie as well as an entertaining one. If you've seen the movie and you have opinions, let us know. I know there's a lot of stuff out there. There are interesting theories posited on the internet. I'll let you guys delve into those. I don't want to crib anybody else's videos or anything like that. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there on YouTube in regards to critical analysis of this movie. So seek that out. If you've seen the movie and you like it, you want to know more, seek that stuff out. And if you haven't seen Coraline, go check it out. Again, Halloween's coming. Great movie to watch with the kids. A little bit scary, a lot of fun, really great, beautiful to look at. Check it out if you haven't seen it, and come back and let us know what you thought. And the last animated horror movie that we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Perfect Blue. Perfect Blue came out in 1997 and is actually, the anime style animation from Japan. So we actually are touching on it a little bit in this video, as I mentioned we would. So this is the one exception to what I was saying earlier about that. If you haven't seen Perfect Blue, the story is about a pop singer named Mima who decides to leave her pop group and pursue an acting career, taking on roles that are a little bit more adult and challenging and dark. And her fans aren't really rolling with that so well. And one particular fan who is stalking her is particularly having a problem with that. And as the stalking continues and escalates, Mima starts to lose her grip on reality and have a hard time understanding or figuring out what's real and what's in her head. And we'll stop there because the movie is a wonderful mystery, and I absolutely don't want to spoil it for anybody because the movie is absolutely fantastic and I love it. Perfect Blue is a movie that I came to much later in the game. I saw it a couple of years ago, and I I I had no idea what I was in for. I had heard occasional mentions of it, through horror stuff that you read or that you watch, and I was, kind of like in the back of my head, I was rolling around, and I finally got an opportunity to see it, and I was blown away at how good the movie is. The animation style is, like I said, it's anime style, and it works extremely well for the movie. The movie is from Japan. It's set in Japan, and it's got that Japanese culture, that J-pop, vibe of rabid fans for these pop bands. These young girls singing, and then of course that is the launching point, the starting point for the descent into genuine horror. The last two movies we talked about have some horror elements, a little bit of scary stuff. This movie is actually pretty scary. It's usually often referred to as a psychological thriller, and we've talked at length about how I feel about that kind of thing. This is a horror movie. It's pretty scary. It's pretty disturbing. There is some deeply disturbing stuff in this movie. It is absolutely not for kids. It is absolutely not for kids. Maybe teenagers or something like that could maybe roll with it pretty well, but it's pretty dark. It's got some pretty disturbing stuff. It's got some trigger warning stuff in there regarding sexual assault and stuff like that. So it is not for everybody. It's not for kids, and it's not for some adults. I'm gonna be honest with you, but it is absolutely fantastic. It's a really compelling story. It's part mystery as you try to figure out who the who is stalking Mima, the protagonist, and what their end goal is. And then it's also the mystery of Mima and her psyche, and is she, how much is she hallucinating, how much is it real, and it starts to play games with the audience. The audience starts to lose track of what's real and what's fantasy. Very, very effective. And then it winds up going into some incredible directions that, of course, I won't spoil. But this movie kept me on my toes. It kept me on the edge of my seat, kept me engaged the entire time, and did not disappoint with an ending. It's absolutely a fantastic, fantastic movie. Now, the movie was based on a book, and I thought it was based on like an anime or like a manga book, but it is not. It's based on an actual novel, and I've tracked down a copy of the novel. I have not read it yet. I was hoping to read it before this review, but I didn't get a chance to. But I'm very curious to see how close it stays to that source material. But on its own, the story is absolutely fantastic. It really, really works. It's a really great delve into paranoia and obsession and stalking. And honestly, Perfect Blue could have gone into so many other subgenres of the horror movie syllabus because it has so many other things that it's drawing into. But it works really well here because, again, the animation style is fantastic. It works really well for this movie. It really reflects the tone of the movie. As the movie gets more unsettling and creepy, the animation does too. It goes from the bright pop stuff and the fantasy stuff to like some darker, grittier, more grimy stuff. Really effective. Works really, really well. Now, if we're going to talk about Perfect Blue, we kind of have to talk about the Black Swan controversy. If you watched my video recently when I talked about Black Swan, I touched on this briefly, how basically there's allegations that Black Swan rips off the story and imagery from Perfect Blue, and that's true. There's no way around this. I looked into this a little bit, and it turns out apparently Darren Aronofsky, back in the day, the director of Black Swan, he looked into trying to get or attempted to buy the remake rights to Perfect Blue and didn't secure them, wasn't able to do it, and then later on made Black Swan. And he claims that Black Swan is not influenced by Perfect Blue, and that's nonsense. Just own up to it, man. If you've seen Black Swan, when you watch Perfect Blue, you're gonna see some things. It's I don't think it's gonna spoil Perfect Blue for you necessarily, but you're gonna see things that you recognize, and there's certain things you're gonna be like, oh, maybe that's a little less surprising, or maybe I saw it coming, or maybe I just caught onto it really quick because I've seen Black Swan. But Perfect Blue came first, and Aronofsky's seen Perfect Blue. It's clear as day. And that's unfortunate. Now, I love Black Swan. When I talked about Black Swan, I talked about how much I loved Aronofsky and Black Swan. I saw Black Swan before I'd even heard of Perfect Blue. And so that love kind of just like is locked in because of the experience, right? But had I seen Perfect Blue first, or even just knew about this controversy, that may not be the case because it does color my feelings and opinion for Black Swan a little bit. And like I said, my love endures because of the origins of it, because it's just that nostalgia thing. It kind of it's kind of locked in your first impression and whatnot. But had I known about this in advance, I think I would have looked a little sideways at Black Swan. I would have been a little bit like, this doesn't feel as original as I did think it was, I mean, for good reason, and that's really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, and it's really frustrating that Aronofsky continues to not just own up to this because I like Aronofsky, and that kind of sucks, frankly. But no matter what, even with the existence of Black Swan, even with that controversy and how unfortunate it is, it doesn't diminish the greatness of Perfect Blue. It really is a fantastic movie. It's incredible. And even if you've seen Black Swan, even if you know about this controversy, it's not going to diminish the movie Perfect Blue on its own. And so, regardless of whether or not you've seen Black Swan, regardless of whether or not you even like Black Swan, I would still encourage you to check out Perfect Blue because, frankly, it's better. It's a better movie. And I love Black Swan. I think Black Swan is excellent, but Perfect Blue is phenomenal. It's not a bona fide classic just because it's so dark and it's kind of niche really in what it's doing. So it's not exactly mainstream, but it should be a bona fide classic. It should be a bona fide animated horror classic because it's that good. If you've seen Perfect Blue, back me up on this. Let me know in the comments. Do you agree? Do you think this is a bona fide classic, or am I being hyperbolic? Do you think it's not as good as that? Are you not really that interested in it? But if you haven't seen Perfect Blue, this is me, basically begging you to check it out. If you like animated horror at all, if you like anime, if you like psychological horror, if you like movies about obsession and paranoia, stalker movies, any of that stuff, check out Perfect Blue. It's phenomenal. And so that is me giving it high praise. And I hope that you check it out. And I hope that for you, it lives up to the expectations that I'm setting. So those are our three picks for the animated horror subgenre, but we have a few extra credit movies to discuss if you like animated horror and are looking for a few other ones to watch. The first movie that we're going to talk about as extra credit is Monster House. And Monster House is a computer animated movie that also incorporates some motion capture into it, which is interesting because at the time that was a really relatively new technology. And we talked about this movie a little bit in my video with horror recommendations. And for Halloween, and it is a good Halloween movie to watch with the kids. It's a very kid-friendly movie. The movie is essentially, if you haven't seen it, is essentially some kids that you're afraid of the scary house on the block that seems to be alive and is terrorizing children. Again, I don't like to spoil movies, so I don't want to get to it too much, but it really ties in well because it's set at Halloween. It ties in well to as a Halloween watch. It's kid centric. The protagonists are all children as they try to address this monster house. So it is kid friendly, a little bit on the scary side because we're dealing with basically a house that eats children, and the explanation for it is a little bit heavy. I don't want to spoil it, of course, but it's a little bit heavy, but it's not too heavy. I'd say overall, your kids can probably roll with this one, and it's good. It's a movie that I think adults can enjoy too. I saw it as an adult, and I liked it quite a bit. I think that the animation style holds up pretty well, and the characters are fun. You know, it's not even though the ending is kind of a dark and deep ending. Overall, the movie it moves at a good clip, and it's kind of fun and kind of light. It's not something to get too it's not too dense or too difficult, and so kids are gonna not get bored. They're gonna enjoy it. Adults are gonna have a fine time with it, and as a result, the movie's been very well received. It's a very popular animated horror movie, and I would endorse that wholeheartedly. It's a fun ride. It's a good time. Like I said, I recommended it for the Halloween recommendations, and I'm recommending it again here as an animated horror movie. It's a good time. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is The Black Cauldron. And The Black Cauldron is a mid 80s Disney movie that is probably the darkest and arguably scariest of the Disney classic animated movies ever to be released. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a fantasy story of a young boy who has to go on a quest and get some allies, go on a quest to retrieve this black cauldron, this magic cauldron, in order to save his friends. And he's dealing with witches and demons, and it's a dark movie. It's a dark fantasy movie, and it's not a Disney musical. It's very very different from what you're used to seeing with the classic Disney movies. Nobody's breaking out into song. It's not particularly all that happy. It's really dark, and rumor has it that it scared the hell out of kids when they released it, and it was not commercially successful. In fact, it was so commercially unsuccessful that it was devastating to Disney's animation department at the time. It really almost destroyed Disney animation. And that's kind of why I'm bringing it up here. It's not a great movie. It's a little bit of a mess. I'm bringing it up because it's a fascinating story. It's a kind of an interesting timepiece, a historical record. The time when Disney tried to get a little bit more adult, a little bit more dark, and failed miserably. A, because it blew up in their faces, the audiences did not go for it, and B, because the movie didn't quite come out good. Now, part of that seems to be because of some editing issues. The movie was really dark, and test audiences did not react well to it, and then the executives got in there and started cutting it themselves, literally started cutting it themselves. And then so what's reflected on the screen is not exactly the director's vision, and in some parts you can kind of tell it's been literally just chopped. It's literally just chopped up, and doesn't quite make sense. It's narratively just kind of a mess, which is unfortunate. But there doesn't seem to be a big appetite necessarily for like the full length version of it, or I'm not even sure if the full length version's ever been released. Maybe it has. I've never really cared enough to go check it out because I found the movie to be fine when I watched it. I was probably, I don't know, teenager when I saw it, early teens. It was fine, but it wasn't super memorable. And I've checked it out again, since then. And yeah, I think that the story behind it is more interesting than the story in it. And that's again why I'm bringing it up here in case you've never heard about it. Maybe instead of watching the movie, yeah, watch the movie. It's fine. It's interesting, and it's interesting to see Disney do something very, very different. So in that sense, it's really interesting to check out. But delve into the story behind it. Start on Wikipedia and then check out the sources and just kind of go down that internet hole, because it's some fascinating stuff. The story behind the Black Cauldron and the effect on Disney at the time in the 80s, it's fascinating stuff. So I'm kind of maybe giving you more recommendation, doing research than watching a movie. And I know that kind of sucks. Consider it homework, I guess. The first time that the horror movie syllabus professor is giving you homework, I guess. But I think you'll find it fascinating too. And the last extra credit movie that we're going to talk about today is Paranorman. And Paranorman came out about a decade ago, and it's the story of a young boy who can talk to the dead, and as a result, he's kind of ostracized in his town. And the town has some dark history that rears its ugly head, and Norman is the only person that can really save the town. And it's a fun movie. It's again, kind of a similar style with Coraline and has similar themes as Coraline, actually, although, in my opinion, not nearly as effective as Coraline, but it's really good. It's a lot of fun. It's got some really good comedy in it, it's got some good voice work in it. I remember, I think it was like 2012 when the movie was going to come out, and I was at Comic-Con and, going to Hall H, which is the big hall where they talk about all the big projects and everything. And I think everybody was waiting for the Game of Thrones panel, I think it was. I'm not even sure, I don't really remember, but Paranorman was what was being talked about at the time. And if you're not familiar with how Comic-Con works, basically you can park your butt in a seat and stay in that room the entire time. The room's very hard to get into, so you want to get there early. And if you wanted to see something at, say, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to get there at like 8 o'clock in the morning and just watch everything that's there beforehand so you can keep your seat. And that was what was happening. Paranorman was there, and everybody wasn't really there to hear about Paranorman. They were there to hear about Game of Thrones or whatever. And Paranorman won everybody over. Uh, People, what they showed, and the director and the cast talking about it, people were won over, and that's saying something. It's saying something that, everybody's there kind of arms crossed, like just waiting for you to get done with your presentation so they can get to what they really want to see. And you still got them, interested. And I think it's a testament to how intriguing and interesting the movie is, how entertaining it is, how well made it is. It's really good. It's a lot of fun. It's another one where I think that it works really well for kids, even though there are some dark things in there. The central history of the town, the central inciting incident of it is pretty dark, but I think it'll kind of go over the kids' heads, and I think it'll just be fine for them, and they'll just kind of roll with the story, which has a lot of comedy in there, has some fun stuff in there. I really like. I think the cast works really well. In particular, Anna Kendrick steals the scenes that she's in as Norman's sister. And yes, I'm a big Anna Kendrick fan. You've heard her name come up a couple times in the past if you watch regularly. So I am probably biased here, but she stole the movie from me every time she was on the screen. She's really funny. Side note about this movie: all the women have really large butts. It's kind of done for comedy, but also kind of seems fetishistic. I don't know. Did the creators of Paranorman like big butts and cannot lie? I don't know. But it was just something I noticed. It's not super sexualized or anything like that. There's a little bit of sexual humor in there that, again, should pretty much go over the heads of the smaller kids, but the adults will appreciate it. So once again, it's another one of those movies that finds a little bit for everybody. I really enjoyed the movie. I have a lot of fun with it. It's not super deep. It's not as good as, say, Coraline. It doesn't have as much going for it as that, but it's a good time. It looks fantastic. It's a good story. Maybe not the most original story, but definitely by no means a dull or boring or uninteresting story. So definitely check it out. It's worth your time. And if you've seen it, let us know what you think. Tell everybody your thoughts on Paranorman. Did you agree about the butts? Did you notice that? Weird, I know. So that's all the time we have for today. We're going to call it a video. I hope you've enjoyed our exploration into animated horror, and I hope you'll go into the comments and make recommendations of your favorite animated horror movies that you think should be on the syllabus, because I know I left a lot of them out. There are several other excellent ones that didn't get talked about today. So I'm counting on you guys to bring them up in the comments below for all of us to see and check out, even if they're anime. I know I said I kind of left anime out on this, and maybe we'll talk about it later. If you have some anime that you love out here, Vampire Hunter D, if you want to throw those in the comment, by all means, please put them in the comments so that people can hear about them, because we're really enjoying everybody's recommendations. I'm checking out the recommendations. More on that in the future. But please get it down in the comments. Share your love for animated horror. Share your thoughts below. Share the wealth, if you will. So until then, we'll see you guys in the comments. Next week, we'll be talking about something else that's pretty similar in theme and tone. So look out for that. But until then, class dismissed.